Welcome to another exciting edition of 4020 Not Live. 20th of May. Phil's got double chocolate. What are they? Just mini bites, as it say.
M&S.
Yeah.
This is what you could have won. That's
When did we get the budget for M&S stuff? What's going on? Are you on the Rugby League rich list under an assumed name?
that's because you're not here. I've had them all to myself.
Don't eat that many things on there. I know the listeners and the viewers will be surprised. Oh, by the way, just to clear things up, Andy was asking when we're going to be live next. I don't know, and it is my fault. So soon, but I don't know when soon will be. We'll just surprise you one Monday. James, are you suitably refreshed after your break?
I don't know if you ever can be with a toddler, a near 3-year-old in tow. You just, you're constantly on the go. But yeah, it was great to get away. We had some good weather. Thank you.
Like having a dog, but the dog likes laying around, so she's listening to me behind me. News, what's happened this week, Phil, in the world of rugby league? Apart from Uganda winning, that was great. Ireland beating Netherlands yesterday afternoon. That was exciting. I watched a bit of that while I was trying to watch everything else. There's lots of positivity around in general.
It's been a great weekend for women's rugby league. I think even if you look at the semi-finals that we saw this weekend, arguably the best game of the four was one of the women's games. Then we had 2 European World Cup qualifiers, Greece beating Serbia, and as you say, Ireland just beating the Netherlands, which is great because that's another team now that's thrown into the mix, and we're going to get Wales against Netherlands to decide who goes through to the World Cup, who goes into the World Series repechage, which is great. And yeah, Uganda and Kenya played in a women's international. That's something you'd think here in respect of rugby league, and played 2 test matches last week and shared them 18-16 and 13-12. So again, the panorama of the sport looks great from a women's perspective. Congratulations, obviously, to Wigan and Catalan on getting through to the Wheelchair Challenge Cup final. And the one thing I would say about the semis, confirmation we were there, is the fact that the atmosphere was better than the matches. And there's been a lot of talk about the crowd size and what do we do about the Challenge Cup. Hats off to all the fans that went, because irrespective of how many there were, the atmosphere was great, and particularly the losing teams who, to be honest, didn't have a lot to cheer about.
The only reason I'm going to Wembley, if I'm allowed, and if I'm not, I'm sure I'll get a ticket because I don't think it's going to sell out, despite what some people think, is to get a printed program with Wakefield on this season, because there's not many of those around these days. You can't get printed programs. My collection is decreasing in value by the second. Some would say it did that as soon as I bought any of them. How have you been then, Joe? Have you had a complete cut off from rugby league? Because that's what I'm hoping the answer to that is yes.
Well, I actually watched more rugby league whilst I was on holiday than I did in the last week, actually, because I reviewed 2 games whilst I was off, one in each of those 2 rounds. So I watched those and I watched some of the other games. But actually, since I've been back, I think I've probably watched about 5 minutes worth of the 2 men's semi-final this weekend. So I've only joined the podcast today to find out what's happened, to be quite honest. Although that's probably not much different from what I saw. It looked like 2 reasonably one-sided games in the men's semis, which were, I suppose, from a TV's perspective, from a neutral's perspective, probably a little bit disappointing.
We didn't mention Origin, Phil, because it was the Magic Round in Australia. It kicked off by the women's Origin, which was great. And well, apart from you're a Queenslander, right? I forget that.
My preference is for the Maroons, as I believe we're contractually obliged to call them. But again, what a spectacle! Highest ever Origin crowd for a women's game, 25,000. All bought into this concept that Magic Weekend has something for everybody, and it now starts with that women's game. But what a quality! Clearly Jamie Chapman's highlight try was something that everybody talked about afterwards. Very, I think, as you pointed out on social media, almost as good as Caitlin Beavers at Wembley, but not quite. But almost Martin Fire-esque in a Origin sense, but quality throughout. And the great thing about it is you now think, right, well, when's the next one? Because I really must watch that. And I'm, we're never going to compare apples with oranges if we look at where the NRLW is compared to what we've seen this weekend with the Women's Super League. Clearly as well, they took the Magic Weekend concept which is something that we're still grappling with as to how best to do it, and where we should have it. They've taken it to the so-called capital of rugby league in Australia, which is Brisbane. They've got sellout crowds over 3 days, irrespective of who's playing who. And again, that's something that we can only dream about, but it just shows you the value of rugby league when you get it right. And the women's Origin game was sensational.
Not sure I get away with saying big, strong girls as much as Phil Gould did all the time. Every single player, even the little ones. Overall, the weekend, 149,196. So granted, a lot of them will have been the same people, but it looks good, doesn't it? Numbers look good. It's good. It's good. It's been a generally good week, I think. Unless something's happened that I've completely forgotten about.
Well, the only consolation for Hull KR is that Willie Peters signed a new 4-year contract, which again, I think there was a lot of speculation about where he might be going. Obviously, Lachlan Lamb is staying for Adrian Lamb's staying for the foreseeable future. Great for Lee. Obviously, Hull was supposedly interested in bringing him across. But of course, the good news for Hull is that Brad Arthur was sacked this morning at Parramatta. So there's another one that can go on their list.
I don't know if that's good news for Hull or good news for journalists trying to fill lists. So from a match official's perspective then, James, has it been a nice couple of relaxing weeks then with the games you've watched? There was no major things for people to get upset about. It appears everyone's been okay in the last 3 weeks. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I can't recall any major controversies on the games that I watched whilst I was away, and obviously I haven't seen the 2 semi-finals. I just had a quick look whilst we're talking at the match review panel. There's 3 players charged with grade Bs, so lower end of the scale. So one would imagine they were probably penalised or otherwise on the game, but I suspect probably not carded. So I think players look like they're generally buying in, and match officials look like they're performing pretty well. So yes, it's relatively quiet.
I don't know all these people behaving. Semi-finals, and people are talking about attendances there and so on and so forth, but they've never been a big neutral event, have they, Phil? I know the crowds in the olden days, thousands and thousands. I'll try to find some numbers today to disprove a point, but 40,000 at a semi in the 1960s or whatever, but we don't live in the 1960s anymore. But they were never an event for neutral, would you? I can't imagine I would think, do I want to go see Huddersfield Warrington? No, probably not, because there's something else to do. So when we look at this number, 9,253 on Sunday afternoon in St Helens, and granted, I think Warrington tweeted they sold about 6,000 tickets. Surely the question is not what's wrong with Rugby League or the Challenge Cup, but why can't Huddersfield get more people to watch their team?
I think there's a couple of issues here, none of which are to do with the competition, which everybody is quick to jump on the bandwagon and say it's got to change because this clearly isn't good enough. Nothing has happened for the last 10 years while we've been saying that, when we've had this podcast, that you've got to look at what does the Challenge Cup represent these days, and in terms of economic hardship, how is it to sell to anybody outside of the competing teams? In which case, look at the fan base of those competing teams, and the numbers that we've got over the weekend are actually exactly what you would expect. I think the other thing to bear in mind, which I don't know if anybody has made the correlation, they probably have, don't have too many original thoughts, but Sunday afternoon was the denouement of the Premier League football season, and there were a hell of a lot of people on thousands of media outlets that were talking about that and nothing else from all weekend. They didn't play till Sunday, but you couldn't get up and listen to a breakfast show on Saturday without it being all about Jurgen Klopp's last game and who was going to win the Premier League. And I don't know what the storylines are because I don't follow it that closely, but you could not avoid it. And we put our semi-finals on at the same time that was happening in the same part of the world that the team that actually won the competition and the guy who was retiring were based. So how many millions of people did we expect to get? I think more importantly, if you look at the television share of the broadcast figures that came out, almost 10% on Saturday, when you didn't have that level of competition. That as far as I know, there was only one, was it a football playoff at Wembley in direct competition with that? Yeah. 10% of the audience share on a Saturday afternoon is pretty excellent. Whether you've got 11,000 people in the stadium or not. I think we need to look at would those games have captivated the neutral viewer? That's a different question. Sunday we got, I think, maybe 3%, but with everything, there's a Grand Prix going on as well at the same time that started at 2:00. Now we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're not going to be the #1 draw if there's a lot of other things on at the same time. We are to the 3%, which is us talking to ourselves, but we're probably not going to compete ever with the last day of the Premier League season.
And the golf, and England were playing cricket at Headingley, which didn't sell out either. And there's always too many things going on. There's no blank space in any calendar. We can't fit anything in anywhere, so we kind of have to go with what we've got. I'm going to throw in someone. Someone said this before, James. I don't know what you feel about this, but semi-finals, should we just scrap neutral venues and just go first out of the hat? You're at home.
Well, with the FA Cup, obviously the semi-finals are played at Wembley, which takes away an element from that competition that you're already playing at Wembley. You're not playing for a place at Wembley. So, for me, I think a neutral venue is the right decision. And I think in terms of the crowds are probably what you would have expected for a league fixture. Now, earlier in the rounds of the Challenge Cup, we can't even get the same numbers you'd expect for a Super League game. So actually, to get 9,000 odd at yesterday's game, I don't think it is particularly a bad crowd. Thinking back to the 22 Challenge Cup semis that I did at Elland Road, it wasn't a great crowd that day. I don't know what the final attendance was, but it's such a big stadium at Elland Road that there were large swathes of empty blue seats, and that's never a good look for TV. So actually, literally the few minutes that I flicked on my phone, it didn't look that bad really. And notwithstanding all that, it was a beautiful, glorious, sunny weekend. And I'm sure if you're in neutral, then you'd probably enjoy spending the time with your family or doing a barbecue or doing whatever. In person, you can watch it on TV for free. So I think it's a difficult ask to try and appeal to the neutrals to go to a semi-final when you've got a final just a few weeks away down in London, which we know is not always a cheap day out. So for me, the semi-finals are all about the two teams involved. So I think for the sake of the competition and its integrity, you should keep it as a neutral venue.
And a full count of Championship and League One fixtures as well, Phil, yesterday as well, which wouldn't have helped, but it can't be helped.
No, and I do think that whilst there were logistical reasons for it, we did make a mistake by not having the Wigan women's and men's team at the same venue. Because speaking to one or two of the Wigan fans, that it's difficult for them to go to both. So they prioritised clearly the men's game because obviously it's more developed than the women's game, and most of their allegiance will be as fans to the men's game over a long period of time. But had you put both of the Wigan women and men on at the same venue, I think more people would have gone. I think you'd have then had Leeds playing at Doncaster, which would have made it easier for more Leeds fans to go there. I think that would have meant clearly that St Helens were playing at home in the women's semi-final against York. But the issue is how developed is the women's Super League and Challenge Cup at the moment. Would that have made a difference? We've seen semi-finals, finals, grand finals played on the home grounds of teams, which you don't get in the men's game. And I don't think it would have been anything other than a lot more St Helens fans would have been at their home ground if they could have seen their women's team play. So I understand there are potential objections and logistical reasons why perhaps we couldn't do that, but I think we made a mistake in that aspect. I think also it's where you place the cameras, because going back to the point that I made right at the very beginning, I couldn't fault the atmosphere. Both grounds before all the games kicked off were absolutely buzzing. Even yesterday, the Wigan Leeds women's semi-final, there weren't a lot of people in the ground when it kicked off. I'd guess maybe 2,000 maximum. But they made a hell of a lot of noise. They were really passionate about getting behind their teams. Certainly, you can never fault that Wigan support, but the media area was slightly nearer to the Hull KR, and they were unbelievable before the game started. And didn't go early and didn't drop their support when it was obvious that they were playing more like they did in Catalan than they do at Craven Park. And it was the same with the Huddersfield fans. They get bagged for however many go, and clearly there are issues at that club as to their overall level of support and why they don't get more. But maybe, I think it was estimated, I'm not saying it was, there were about 600 of them there yesterday. They made a hell of a lot of noise, and even when it was obvious from quite early on that they weren't going to win, They stayed behind us. You could hear the cowbell. So I think look at where there are issues with the Challenge Cup and why it's no longer as popular as it once was, and we've all had our say on that about maybe it is Super League in another guise, but in a knockout format. The romance perhaps isn't there and may never come back as it currently exists, and I don't know how you change that. And I think actually it was a decent weekend, and where you put the cameras is important. Because again, the main cameras were overlooking areas, particularly at Doncaster. I think again at St Helens, where they hadn't sold the seats initially, so the seats were full, or near full. The ends were near full. That's where all the atmosphere was. Where the tickets weren't sold was opposite the main seated stand, and that's where the cameras were looking at. So it probably looked worse than it actually was as well.
Should we go chronologically? I keep getting messages from people complaining about the. So I'm trying to find the right word that's not bias. In the commentary on Saturday's women's semi-final, I keep being told that it was very pro-York. I have to thank St Helens women because their over 14.5 points has paid for my Wembley hat, which, as people will notice here, is representing the German football club of Darmstadt. I mean, any other doesn't look like anything else to me, does it? Where is it? No idea. 32 points to 2. That was a demolition from St Helens against the York side, who, I tell you what, they did well, Phil, because how York managed to not spread the norovirus to the men's team, and we know there's crossover between the squads, so to speak. There's phrases you wouldn't have used in the olden days, but there is, because we'll talk about the men later. But York, without key players, and to be honest, I'd back Saints when we knew Tara Jane Stanley wasn't playing, because everything goes through her a lot, doesn't it? But can't take anything away from St Helens. They went out there and did the job and did it very well, especially after that first 15-20 minutes of York pressure where they just could not break through the Saints defence.
Yeah, I think when we arrived at the ground, word started spreading that obviously norovirus had run through the York camp for around a week or so, and that it was estimated that maybe half of their team under normal circumstances might not have the energy to see out the game. So it proved, second half they were overwhelmed. You can't take anything away from St Helens for that. The one thing I did not understand about the York performance, I thought the first half, if they were suffering, they put everything into it. It was almost like we'll throw the kitchen sink in the first half, and if we can get a lead and establish it, we might have enough energy to hold on to it. But if we can't, then there's not a lot more we can do. I just thought, why would you go for a penalty when you were 12-0 down? I almost thought psychologically that handed the initiative over to St Helens and basically said, we just don't have the energy to score enough points to overtake you. They were threatening the line. They needed a try, and to go for goal and not be nilled effectively. It almost said to me, we're not expecting much else from what we can do. I couldn't fault York for their effort, but this, as the game wore on, you could tell that this was a St Helens team that has a destiny to play in a cup final and really wants to defend their title at Wembley. A slightly different looking St Helens team as well this year, but again playing in such a way that once they got on top, they were pretty much remorseless. I think they'll have to start better if they're gonna win at Wembley, though. Yeah,
but I'm not going to tip Leeds to win because that always goes wrong anyway. Did you ever have problems in the referees department with norovirus or anything? And you'd have to. Well, no, I don't even want to go there. But
we did in the World Cup in Australia, yes, because for the first time ever we were all held in camp. It was very much like a school trip, eating in the same room for 6 weeks, eating the same 3 versions of the soup. That Hull FC soup, media soup that you talk about. It was butternut squash or something else. It was like on a rotation for 6 weeks. So I got it twice. It was known as the Townsville tummy. Anybody that had been to Townsville picked it up, and then it went through the squad. So when I did England against PNG in the quarterfinal in Melbourne in about 30 degrees, I was absolutely exhausted before kickoff. So I have utmost sympathy with York for this one. I just wonder what the effect of this is on the rest of their season, because the heartbreak of losing out at this stage last year, and and the pressure that they may have felt, that pressure may have been relieved, I suppose, going into the game, given the squad that they had there. But yeah, I just wonder what effect that might have. And having beaten St Helens already this year, they would have been confident going into that game to potentially get to Wembley for the first time. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this when they're back out there.
I think I mentioned that to Lindsay Anfield about that being the next. Now you've won the grand final. This is the next thing we're all going to hit you with a stick about. You're on mute, Phil.
Yeah, I like the use of the phrase "went through." Not sure it's appropriate.
Saints are there, and they will play Leeds again because they beat Wigan 34-20 in a cracking, as you said, Phil, earlier, probably the best of the four semi-finals we saw this week. This was Sunday lunchtime at St Helens. I thought Faye Gaskin was brilliant on the telly, by the way. Really good. She needs to be used more. And speaking of using more, Rowan Smith, is he going to sign Ruby Enright up to do the kickoffs for the men? Because she completely flummoxed and bamboozled those Wigan Warriors.
You see, short kickoffs work. Everybody criticises them, but actually get it right. And no, I think, first of all, full credit to Wigan, because, again, that is a very young squad that's evolving under Dennis Betts. It's the first time they've played what might be called one of the top three teams. Well, it's the top three teams. Let's make no bones about it. And for an hour, they were absolutely in the game. Great spirit. Some really talented young players that are just learning what it takes. But again, when their energy levels went, they had nothing left. Leeds did score 7 tries to 3. So, I think they were worthy winners. Leeds also had the ability to bring Zoe Hornby off the bench, which Wigan didn't. And I thought her presence was, imperious when she came on, not only scoring the try, but, busting up the middle. Took a lot of energy out of Wigan. She did that in both of her stints. But Hannah Butcher, I thought, was outstanding as the skipper. When it looked like the game wasn't going their way, it was like very much, well, just give me the ball and I'll do it myself. And then now I've done it, I'll just create a try for somebody else. And could we just go on and win the game now, please? And that's the kind of leadership that you didn't see in some of the men's games with teams that were on the back foot. So, yeah, I thought it was quite a complete performance from Leeds. Again, Lois Forsell apparently I did repaint the dressing rooms at half-time, or they needed repainting after she'd torn the paint off them, which is not something she's normally renowned for, but she just felt that they hadn't gained that level of control that perhaps they needed to do to create a statement. Be an interesting game Friday night now. Saints and Leeds women play each other in the league. Obviously, before Wembley, we've got Wigan and Warrington men playing each other the week before. So will there be a little bit of let's just keep something back from the opposition before the big day? But no, I thought Saints were pretty ruthless, and Leeds just wore down Wigan, and it is set up for a repeat, but another great final.
So on Friday, if you're Lewis, do you not pick Zoe Hornby and also Saints don't get a chance to try and work out how to stop her? That's my question.
The interesting thing is more with the men's game, because Wigan play Warrington the week before Wembley, and we know with all the HIA protocols, we know with disciplinary and match review, we do know that there may be somebody who might go out there and try and perhaps wind a player up to entice them perhaps to be in front of that match review panel. Oh no, Jake Connor's not in.
Because they're not signing him on loan, are they? He's not going to go on loan to one of these clubs next week.
No doubt we'll come to him later. But how you approach that men's game, I have absolutely. It is almost like, let's just play the 2 academy teams and let's hope nobody notices.
They said on commentary Hannah Butcher's retiring. Surely not. Surely not.
Hannah Butcher retires every year, normally after a major final when you interview her, and then she turns up for pre-season training.
Dominic Gracefield, that was the other thing I learned this. There was a lot of talk in the pre-match about how Leeds would be missing Shona Hoyle, but I thought, from what I've seen of them so far this season, it's only been on TV. I think they would have missed Gracefield more, but that's just my opinion.
Interesting as well that they've turned Bella Sykes from a hooker to a second rower.
So Leeds and St Helens, they're the curtain raiser to the curtain raiser of the main event at Wembley, of course, as we know, couple of weeks time. We've also got the wheelchair final the week before in Sheffield, Wigan versus Catalans. a repeat of the European club final from a couple of weeks ago, though Wigan will have Jack Heggie back, who, of course, scored a hat-trick in the grand final. Did score 4? I can't remember. Well, I'll ask him. I'll ask him when we see him again. So that'll be exciting. And now we know it will be Wigan versus Warrington for the first time since 1990 at Wembley, I think. Wigan, 24-0 up at half-time. Hull KR never really looked like they were going to get back into that. I think it's probably fair to say.
Just going into the game, because clearly I've not watched it, so I've limited to what I can add to this discussion. But going into the game, I always thought the worst thing that happened for Hull KR was a few weeks ago when they beat Wigan. Because psychologically, that just gave Wigan the extra edge if they needed it in a semi-final for a place at Wembley. To I don't know. It's interesting. Again, I talk about the top 6 inch quite a bit, don't I, in terms of that sports psychology element. I do wonder, what effect that result had on Wigan and their attitude in this game. You certainly couldn't go into that game if you're Wigan undercooked to play a side that's beating you, and not just beating you, but beat you quite convincingly if only a few weeks ago. So, and as you've sort of hinted at before, that Hull KR's performance in Catalan, and then since then, has been fantastic. So I think if you're a Hull KR fan, you're probably bitterly disappointed. Particularly because the result last year in that semi-final as well, and now that went to Golden Point, they fancied their chances.
So the great psychology then, going into, I'm jumping around again, but going into Wigan Warrington in a couple of weeks' time, then you don't want to win that by plenty because you're giving the opposition the chance for a kick up the backside, but you also don't want to lose because you still need to be maintaining whatever momentum is for the rest of the Super League season.
Yeah, I mean, you clearly don't go. Yeah, you clearly don't go into a game wanting to lose, but it's the effect of that result, isn't it, on subsequent games? I think by the time that game comes around, it's all gone then.
How good's Junior Nsemba, Phil? Because he's quite impressive. He's a big lad.
Ridiculously outstanding for where he is in his rugby league education at the moment, and an absolute credit to the way Wigan bring youngsters through their system. Willie Isa is somebody who, when it comes around to the big games, normally produces the kind of performance that you need to win. Doesn't always get the headlines, but clearly is the sort of person that you want on the front line, and as I think again have to say, in the trenches next year. But he wasn't missed because Nsemba is just such a physical presence, and he's now getting the skills and the confidence to go with the fact that clearly he has an ability to run onto the ball very hard and very often. I just think the thing about semi-finals and big games is you get to know which of your players have got that extra step in them that can go up a level when it really matters. And when you put them under pressure, whether they can respond. And it wasn't yet Wigan were absolutely remorseless in everything that they did. But they don't give you many opportunities. But if you know that that's what you're going to come up against, when you get an opportunity, you have to take it. And Hull KR didn't. And the worry for Willie Peters, and he almost again hinted at it without wanting to go into it too much afterwards, because clearly you've got to process what's just happened. You've effectively let down your support base because you're promising that you're going to be getting closer and closer to the top 3 teams, and this will be an indication that perhaps you're not quite there yet. Is he always talks about the difference between your best and worst, and making that gap as narrow as it can possibly be. So the best clearly is beating Wigan and St Helens at home. The worst is losing away at Catalan, and almost a repeat of that in this performance. And he was really disappointed. I think that, I think he could have taken defeat if you say it, the boot had been on the other foot to last year, and maybe they'd have lost in Golden Point extra time to a drop goal, but they were never in it. And the mistakes they made early on against a team as good as Wigan just meant that however well Mikey Lewis played, and you couldn't fault him for everything that he was trying to do, but he just looked like a one man taking on 13. And it was, as you say, never a contest, because at 24-0, Wigan were never, ever going to throw that away. It
is a strange criticism of a match that it's a blowout. This is terrible. This is the worst thing that can happen. You can't fix the result beforehand. We can't say, just play out nicely, lads, set for set, try for try, and then in the last 20 minutes, do whatever you want. Professional sport, doesn't work like that, apart from professional wrestling, obviously.
And let's not underestimate, from Hull KR's point of view, they were playing the world champions, and just looking there that since Wigan lost that semi-final last July, they went on to win 21 of 23 matches, and only one of those two defeats that they had was against Hull KR only a few weeks ago. So, it's no disgrace to lose against the world club champions, isn't it? In a semi-final, ultimately Hull KR have done well; they got to a semi-final, but disappointing that they couldn't get there in back-to-back finals. I mean, when was the last time Hull KR went to back-to-back Challenge Cup finals? They'd have to go back into the record books for that one, I'm sure.
Oh, no, you're testing me. I've not got the list. I've got the list of championship finals, so I'm going to make a point later, but I can't be bothered with that now. But earlier, 81, I think, might be the answer.
Well, what I'll do is I'll Google it, so people
Google
can be thinking when they're listening to the podcast, because I don't have much to say, do I? So I can Google it.
When we go to the break in a few minutes, which everyone loves.
It's not about what you say; it's how much you say. It's the quality of what you say.
These podcasts are going for 5 hours. They've got nothing to say. We keep it tight. That's what we're going to do.
I don't say much of quality either, so that's got that covered.
Doncaster as a venue, Phil, was it everything that we need for this kind of event?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was fine. I mean, easily accessible off any motorway route. Modern facility, about 16,000 you can get in there. So good atmosphere. Wasn't that far off a full house. No, it was fine, absolutely fine. And I think we get too hung up about where we play matches and which supporters have got to travel a little bit further. If your team's got to a semi-final and you can afford to be there, then I don't think you care whether it's in Motherwell or Bristol. You just go where the game is, and all of the fans that were there at both of the semi-finals before a ball was kicked, because obviously your enjoyment of the event is determined by then how your team played. But before a ball was kicked, the atmosphere in both was great. There were no dissenting voices about Huddersfield had to travel over the Pennines and Wigan had to travel up the road. Or however it worked. It was. No, they were great. Warrington's a great venue. Doncaster's a great venue.
And there are only so many venues available at a certain time as well, aren't there? Not everything's available all the time.
I think the other thing to bear in mind about that Wigan performance is that there were a couple of people from Wigan near us that said, you want to watch for Jai Field and Bevan French today because they haven't really played on a dry track yet. And they love the big occasion. They love the firm ground. They love the sun on their back and, a big crowd behind the sticks backing them. This is made for them. And that was before the game had even started. And I thought Field probably didn't get the credit he deserved. He was devastating every time he touched the ball, and it was obvious that they were going to have a bit of fun, and they did within that strict. This is how we have to approach the game, and let's build it on the back of, Luke Thompson, absolutely outstanding. It was only when the game finished that you realised he never went off. He did the full 80 minutes in that heat, and was as effective at the end as he was at the beginning. That was an astonishing performance. The balance between the two hookers they've got is fantastic. But you give Field that as his platform, he was devastated, absolutely devastated.
And there's all the potential now in the world that having won the award that I've forgotten the name of at the grand final in October, Wardle could win the Lansdowne Trophy at Wembley in a couple of weeks' time. He could have both of them on his mantelpiece. Wigan are through. They will play Warrington, and we'll talk about them and all the other things that went on this weekend in a few moments' time here on 4020 Not Live. Oh, James is going to say something. Oh, you're not.
Yeah, I got the answer. I think you were right.
Yeah.
You were right. 1980 and then 1981, but they played in eight Challenge Cup finals and lost 7 of those. But they played. Go on. Who did they play? Who did they play in 1980?
Is that the Hull FC one and 81's Widnes, or the other way around?
Correct. You had it correct. You see, stick with your first answer.
It's only because I've been posting programs recently. That's all.
81, one of the worst finals that we've seen, with all due respect to the winning team.
Was it worse than 79? Because that was the answer the other week. Phil.
That was the worst, and 81 wasn't far behind it.
I'm going to give you some championship final stats now because I've got a minute to fill. Wigan Wakefield in 1960, which was a great day for Wigan. 83,000 at Odsall. The year after at Odsall, Leeds Warrington when it was Leeds' year, 52,000. I can only imagine what the Rugby League press would have made of that in them days. So a massive drop-off between the glamour sides of Wakefield and Wigan and the less glamour of Leeds and Warrington. But we will talk more about the Wolves in a minute. Welcome back. 4020 Not Live. Second half of the programme. One semi-final left. Huddersfield 10, Warrington 46. As it's have you had any yet, Phil? Are you sneaking them between?
Of course, we had a break. What else are you going to do in a break?
The Guardian. I don't know if you've seen their match report on yesterday's game, Phil, or James. I don't know. You might not be Guardian readers. Here's how it starts. Written by PA Media. I wonder what those initials stand for. Great surname. Sam Burgess paid tribute to George Williams after the fly half led from the front. What? What's a fly half? What's one of those? What fisherman take? Warrington, they're through to the final. Sam Burgess is great. We'll talk about that in a moment. 46 points to 10. Almost, I mean, you were at both these games, Phil. Was it almost a repeat of Saturday's game, or was it slightly different?
Pretty much. I think you knew that, when it was 12-0 in the very early stages, that was probably it. Yes, Huddersfield have the ability to grind away at the opposition, and maybe it was that try just before half-time that made it 22-4 when you finally realised that they weren't going to mount a comeback. But as we were saying with the whole KR game, a lot of it is about discipline, which is not so much whether you give penalties away or not, although that clearly is a factor within your discipline. It's what you do when you've got the ball in good position, and it's what you do when you try and mop up if you've made a mistake. And Hull KR didn't have a lot of it, and Huddersfield had none of it. And I of the two games, that was the most disappointing one, because I just don't think Huddersfield turned up. And I think you have to mention Jake Connor, that, it's not all down to him. It clearly can't be. But some of the petulance that he showed as the game went on, some of the still trying to get into the heads of the opposition and under their skin when you're already in virtually a losing position, has more of a detrimental effect on your own team than it's ever. All that happens then is that the crowd and certainly, I think Danny Walker, when there was the sin binning, who was having to go back at him, all it does is it makes you look small and foolish, and it starts to, I think, get under the skin of your own players who are trying their hardest to stay in a game, and all the time, all they're doing is looking around, going, "What is he doing now? Why don't they go over there and fish him out of this hole?" Or, "Oh, why is there a fight started over there? Because he's done something that he didn't need to do." And I think there was a very, very telling comment by Ian Watson in the post-match press conference, and he was asked by Mr. PA Media, what do you do about Jake Connor? And he said, well, to be fair to Jake, I need to have that conversation with him before I have it with the media, but we have to do something. And this isn't all about Jake Connor, but it is about how when you get to big games and you need your big players to stand up and do the things that they can do best, when they don't do it, they do become a liability.
He signed you from Hull, didn't he? He signed you from Hull. Yeah.
But Ian Watson talks about process. Now, where in the process does it talk about some of the behaviours that Jake Connor displays? And we had a similar conversation a few weeks ago when they played at St Helens, and he stood there sort of looking for a decision from the referee, while meanwhile St Helens scored a try. And I said at the time that I was critical of Ian Watson's comments in the press because he was basically sort of almost defending Jake Connor and suggesting that the referee should have made a decision. Well, he's entitled to that view, but I gave the opinion that all that does is play into the hands of Jake Connor, which I think it does. And I think he made a fair point that if I was a player on that team, I'd be thinking, hang on a minute, you're getting us in the mess here again potentially. And yeah, he's a magician, sometimes with the ball in hand and what he can do, but you can't be rocks and diamonds. The best players are the most consistent players, and that part of his game has to change, and that's ultimately why he's not being selected for England and won't be selected for England unless he has a major overhaul of the way in which he plays. I think he creates potentially more disruption in a team than the benefit that he can bring when he does perform. And as I say, he's a talented player, but I know sometimes you've got to accept that players have personality traits, and that makes them a great player. But we've not seen him perform on a consistent basis year in, year out that merits the odd occasion where he may, be erratic in his behaviour. But as I say, I didn't see more than a couple of minutes of this game. But again, from the outside looking in, it looks a one-sided game, and another semi-final where a team hasn't shown up, which is disappointing. I think actually Huddersfield have probably done quite well to end up in a semi-final based on where they are in the league table and how their season's been going, because it's certainly been an inconsistent year.
And especially after, we've talked about Hull KR playing against Catalan. Huddersfield won in Catalans in this competition. And that's no easy place to go, obviously. Cliche. But to then almost not turn up, and I don't want to take anything away from Warrington, but that's what the scoreline suggests. They were blown away early doors and could never get back into this one. And you look at Mikey Lewis is a player who likes to give it out, but he didn't give it out when they were losing to Wigan on Saturday. He just got on with his job, and I don't know what he felt inside. He was probably massively frustrated, as they all were, but he's managing to keep a lid on things at the minute.
Yeah, I think, again, you've got to look at, does that result now in Catalan actually mean anything? Because if you don't go on and get to the final and maybe win it, it's another occasion where you've had a great 80 minutes in a season that, falls flat, in which case, how do you evaluate that 80 minutes? And, I don't know what Huddersfield would look at and say went wrong in that game. I just don't think they ever had a measure of control over it, which would be a concern for the remainder of the season, because now clearly they've got some ground to make up in Super League, and they're going to have to do some convincing of their fan base, committed though it might be, but small though it undoubtedly is, that they should keep turning up every week. And in some ways, Jake Connor does sum them up, that they have the ability on a given week to play really well against opposition that perhaps you wouldn't think they would beat and look fantastic. But if you cannot do that in the big games when it really matters, then it doesn't count for anything. And by the time we get to Wembley and we're talking about Sam Burgess, because he will hog all of the headlines. It's great from a media point of view that he's there. He's one of the people outside of our, enclave of rugby league minded lovers that people will instantly identify with. He does interview well. He does say the right things. I think, it, again, was very good in the post-match, deflecting away from it. Stop talking about me. It's nothing to do with me. It's all about the guys. And, but he has a storied history behind him on a number of levels. And that buys us publicity that perhaps we don't normally get. So he'll be the talking point. This, our Wigan at the start of another dynasty, will be the next storyline, which, they are well worthy of being discussed in that manner. What we won't be talking about is Huddersfield did really well at Catalan in the quarterfinals, and that's where I think Ian Watson has a problem, and that's where I think the makeup of his team and what he wants that team to be. And we talk about it every week. Identity. Hull are going through this at the moment. What is their identity? What sort of players do they need to sign or want to sign that epitomise what they want to be and who they are and what they stand for? And I don't see that. They'll probably go on now and have an unbeaten run and get to the playoffs. I just don't see, on the back of where they were last year, how Huddersfield have changed this year. And if they do lose Luke Yates to Warrington next year, which is heavily rumoured at the end of his contract, then again, that is a massive loss, because if you do need someone to follow who's got one of the best work ethics around, you take him out of that. I don't know who they'll get to replace him.
Looking at the Super League table, 11 played, 8 wins, 3 defeats. Why Sam Burgess the greatest coach ever and Paul Whelan's lucky to have a job?
Isn't it strange how the world of sport and the world of rugby league looks? I don't know whether that's partly influenced by the criticism that was probably levelled at his appointment, actually, in the first place.
Is that us now? I think we were questioning it somewhat on this programme. We're not going to hide.
But I think, probably legitimately, as we've discussed, probably in relation to Richie Myler, and it's no criticism of the individuals concerned. It's, if you were looking to recruit somebody and looking at respective CVs, there were probably people that applied for that job at Warrington that may have had a stronger CV in terms of a coaching career. But what you probably can't question is Sam's pedigree and willingness to win and his effort and his desire. And actually that counts for a lot. And when Phil's talking about identity of a club, clearly that seems to be what Warrington are trying to build on. And players have referenced in post-match interviews, haven't they, that, if I'm start of feeling not 100% or I've got taken a knock in a game or whatever, I know what my coach has done when he was playing, and he's not going to ask me to do anything that he hasn't done himself. And I think when you set that culture from the top, and he's prepared to give youth a go, then you can see actually that it's a bit of a winning combination in some ways. It might not get them over the line this year, but actually given a few years, they may get there. So, it may play into Wigan's hands that Sam can take the headlines going into the cup final, and they can come in as almost not quite underdogs, but they can go under the radar as the team that is a successful team, and Sam can take the headlines. But I still would suggest that Wigan would be the favourites going into that game because of their recent successes. But I wouldn't write off Warrington, to be honest, and the attitude that Sam can bring to that team going into a major final.
And he hasn't had yet that period where he's got to ask questions of himself and his team, because they've been relatively successful so far.
I think the other thing we should point out is that Martin Gleeson needs to take a lot of credit, that where Sam may be naive in the intricacies of coaching because he's only at the very beginning of his journey, the people he has around him and he can rely on and can add the bits to his coaching portfolio that perhaps he doesn't have at the moment is Martin Gleeson and the way that they attack. And I think that is epitomised by Matt Duffy. Because I think, again, whilst he possibly didn't have the petulance in character that Jake Connor does, and this isn't Let's Have a Go at Jake Connor podcast, Matt Duffy was very much rocks and diamonds last year, that whilst you give him some space, he was one of the quickest players in the competition, he'd burn you. He wasn't renowned for his defence. He wasn't renowned for being around when the going got really, really tough. And to coin phrase, putting his body on the line. He was one of these, give me the ball and I'll do something for you. I think the Matt Duffy we're seeing at the moment is the complete opposite of that. That he's getting as much kudos off his teammates and his coach for the try-saving tackles. If they're scoring off the back of those try-saving tackles, that's great. And I think that's something that Sam Burgess has brought in, that we are in this together. We have had very talented individuals before. We bought some very good teams, but we've never achieved anything because we've just got a collection of talent. What we haven't got is that will and desire amongst us. He's sprinkled into that some local youngsters, which Warrington traditionally haven't done in the past. And I think the most important thing for me after the game was watching Sam Burgess walk round with the players, and the players' kids were all on the pitch as well, with the rapport that he has rapidly got inside 3 months with the Warrington fans, because he's giving them exactly what they want. And yes, they're winning more games than they're losing. Yes, he's taken them to Wembley very, very quickly. But what they've got is a team that they really, really can get behind. And they can look at people like James Harrison. They can look at Danny. When Danny Walker wasn't a risk because he was already the England hooker. But when you let Darrell Clark go, you're investing a lot of confidence into Danny Walker, who has admittedly bided his time and deserved it. But Danny Walker is repaying them with the kind of performances that the Warrington fans are now looking at him and going, we'll call him one of us, because he's playing in a way that we haven't gone out and bought him. He's served his apprenticeship. He knows what is expected. He hung around when he didn't have to. He could have gone to most other Super League clubs if they were looking for a hooker, but now he's doing it for us, and he's wearing the shirt, and he wants to wear the shirt. And I just think that sort of cohesion that Sam has brought very, very quickly is to his credit. And that may not be his coaching ability, that may be his man management.
Dipping into League One, I'm going all over the place, but results this weekend: Cornwall 0, Oldham 42, which on paper you'd say is probably a decent result for Cornwall. Midlands 66, Newcastle 4, Rochdale 56, Workington 12. But the one with stories to talk about, not necessarily in this match, is North Wales Crusaders 10, Keighley Cougars 30. I know they're your mates, James, but I've got to say the owners of Keighley look much better on telly in their kits than Derek Beaumont looks in a leopard print suit. And I'm now desperately, before the magazine comes out, trying to write some kind of joke about Keighley Cougars and Carol Vorderman, and I'm not quite got there yet, but I will do and if you've got one at home, please share it with us. They were wearing their new kit on Channel 4, the former home of Rugby League.
Yeah, they were on the Joe Lycett's live program, is it? I kind of floated in and out of the room and caught snippets, but so I didn't watch the full program, so I don't know whether they did feature on the show or not. But yeah, they look fetching in their new Pride kit for next month, which is the colours of the trans flag.
They won 30 points to 10 at North Wales Crusaders, Phil, who are asking for money. So if I'm a Super League club, why aren't I just buying North Wales Crusaders? Because then I can play my reserves there. I don't have to mess around with that competition, which is a nonsense anyway. They're going to get proper games, and if League One's not good enough, I can send them to a championship team on loan. There's a kind of infrastructure. There's this, that, and the other. Why are we not just buying North Wales Crusaders? If they only need so much money to survive, that's not much.
Yeah, but the trouble is that what they need to survive? Because we've seen this before, haven't we? That it can be the start of a slippery slope. And if you go for public donation, what is the underlying reason that you need to go down that road? Because rarely, if ever, in sport, and we've seen it even with fans cooperatives, it just doesn't work, because the amount of money you need to run a semi-professional sports team is beyond let's pass a bucket round the people that are already buying season tickets. That's a concern, I think, this early in the season to be doing that. I think the other thing is it highlights something that we've said before on a number of occasions, that what is the development policy of the sport as a whole? This is acknowledging the fact that it's a sport that doesn't have vast amounts of resources. It's not like, again, the NRL that are going to be giving all the other clubs in the NRL $2 million Australian dollars to allow the admittance of other teams. You know, I think our owners would bite their hands off if we're going to get a huge sum of money to allow other teams to come in. It's more to do with what is our policy on London, what is our policy on Wales. You know, how do we value these areas where clearly there are talent pools at our disposal? There's the geographical spread of the competition, which is supposedly going to interest new sponsors. There's links into, as we started this podcast, the Wales women's team. There's a whole number of issues about development that says Wales and London and the South are very strategic areas, but actually we don't want to do anything to support them, or we don't have the money to support them. And to now hear that North Wales is potentially in financial difficulties is really worrying for the game, and not just the North Wales issue.
And again, it's not just a rugby league issue, because the I don't know what his job title is at the Welsh Rugby Union, but he was on the telly yesterday saying they might be cutting down from 4 regions to 3. And obviously the North Wales Crusaders going back were the Celtic Warriors, weren't they? And then so on and so forth. So it's not good for rugby of any kind in Wales, but I don't think it would cost too much money, perhaps, for us to get a better foothold there compared to others. So we'll see what happens there. League One fixtures this week: Hunslet, Cornwall, Keighley, Oldham, Midlands, North Wales, and Newcastle, Rochdale. Obviously, that Keighley Oldham game sounds like an absolute belter, doesn't it? The 2 teams at the top of the table, albeit that Keighley have played a game more. Probably the biggest test for Oldham so far this year. Championship: Bradford 28, Sheffield 10, Dewsbury 12, Featherstone 46. They've signed Greg Eden. Doncaster 26, Batley 0. I mean, I've just said Sheffield Eagles have lost, but it's going well for the South Yorkshire clubs in the Championship. Sheffield 3rd, Doncaster just outside the top 6. They're having a great year so far, Doncaster. Relatively, 4 wins from 8 games. Probably wouldn't have expected them to be this high in the table, but they are. Toulouse 38, Barrow 16, Wakefield 46, Swinton 22. Sounding much closer than it was on the final scoreline. Couldn't get any closer at Widnes, 28 all against Whitehaven. And York, we flagged this up last week, big game for them, and they beat Halifax 40 points to 18. And the questions have got to be asked continually now. What's going on at Halifax? They won the 1895 Cup last year at Wembley. They've obviously got some kind of issue with paying the rent to the council. and they are second bottom of the table, only above a side who were promoted from League One last season. So what has happened at the Halifax Panthers, and why are we not talking about it? We don't know. We don't have any answers.
I was hoping, I was hoping that Phil was going to answer that one.
I don't have any answers.
I think they are starting a rebuild under Damien Clayton, which literally is from the foundations upwards. And I think he said when he took over that there would be some short-term pain. I think it's going on longer than perhaps even he would have liked at the moment. Clearly, there are, again, recruitment is a really interesting thing. And this isn't, again, pointing the finger at a player. It's indicative of what is the right way of going about doing things. But Gareth Widdop was a great signing for Halifax from the point of view that he's coming out of Super League. He's got a storied past. He's international. He's from the town. So obviously you want to have him as your totemic player in many respects to draw in the crowd, to have the juniors in the area look up to somebody like him and say, well, he played at my club as a junior, and if he can do that, then maybe I can do that. But I think what Damien Clayton found was that the pathways weren't there between the professional club and the community clubs in the area as strongly as they should have been. We'll use Siddle as an example, that they are producing some fantastic young players who just seem to be ending up at Wigan and then in Australia. But they're not having that foothold. There's nothing. They don't go from juniors to Halifax and then Halifax get the benefit of a fee because Wigan then signed them. They're going straight from their community club into a Super League arena, and I think all of that is missing. I think whatever the deal is with the council, clearly it's one that on the crowds that Halifax get at the moment, they find it difficult to afford, but they need to stay in the town. And that facility is under economic pressure for the council. So how do they justify further investment in it? The football team, which has nothing to do with the rugby league team, but plays out of the same venue, have a much better history than where they are in the football pyramid at the moment. So again, instead of it being full every week and offering cash into the coffers of the sporting teams that play there and the council that fund it, it's actually bleeding money at a time when that money isn't available. So I think the issues at Halifax are wider than their performances on the field. I think it's more to do again with they are one of the clubs that could benefit from IMG and grading, because they were almost blindly moving along, trying to be something that perhaps they couldn't, and always asking for investors to put them to somewhere where they weren't. They now have a blueprint that says, if you want to move up the ranks, yes, you do have to have a competitive team on the field, but that will only count for a quarter of what we're really looking from you. Have you got all the other stuff? And I think what Damien Clayton is doing is addressing the other stuff. And at the moment, sadly, that's reflecting on the field.
I wish the letters page in League Express would write back to people and put comments in. Not when they're saying there's no staple. Where's the staples gone? Where the staples gone from the paper? But when they say so-called experts in America, IMG actually, they do know what they're doing. It was funny because Eddie Hearn was on a podcast this week and said he'd have done this, this, and this. But if he'd been in charge and IMG were on a podcast, everyone would be slagging Eddie Hearn off as they were before. So no one can win. I do wonder, and I'm sure we've mentioned this before, we keep telling ourselves this is the greatest game. And I think people believe, it's like a cult, people believe it. But there is a whole world out there that doesn't know about us, or perhaps wouldn't like to be arrogantly told that this is the greatest thing and actually the thing you watch is rubbish. But in the Championship, doesn't get any easier for Halifax at home to Doncaster on Sunday. Barrow, Featherstone, Batley, Bradford, Swinton, York, and Whitehaven, Wakefield. Saturday night, Toulouse, Widnes, and Friday, Sheffield versus Dewsbury. Before I look at the fixtures in Super League, or we do, is anything else at all that I've forgotten about that's gone on? No one's. I mean, Tommy Makeson's leaving St Helens, but even I knew that was happening, and I don't know anything. And Tom Johnson's coming back to Wakefield.
You'll be telling me that was a surprise.
We haven't even put a pound on the gate like when Nigel Wright was coming back, and he didn't come back. Where did the pounds go? With Tom Johnson happening.
No, I think two Wigan players have got a one match ban from this weekend. I'm not sure that you got to feel a bit for Sam Walters, who's one of them, because he literally got on, made his debut, and has now been banned for a game. So he did set up a try though, and it's great to see him back out there.
Fresh for Wembley. That's the good thing. Double header on Sky on Friday, and that's another thing. Now they've announced their Sky Sports Plus thing. It does put Rugby League and Super League on the same level as all of the tennis in the world and all of the football in the Football League in the world. We're all on the same level. So that's a good position to be in. Friday night kicks off 5:30, St Helens versus Leeds Women's Super League, followed by St Helens versus Leeds in the Men's Super League. That'll be good.
Can you record off Sky Plus?
I have no idea.
The trouble we're going to have is at the moment, everything's on the Sky channels. You can flick between everything. You can record something, go back to it later. If we're going to persist with kickoffs at the same time, which we are going to do for the remainder of this season, because it was too late to change it, no matter what people think. Can we actually record off Sky Plus? I think that question needs to be asked by somebody who's got a media column.
Do we know anyone at Sky? We've got any contacts. I don't think I've said anything negative about Sky, so it's okay. Also on Friday, Castleford versus Hull, Huddersfield versus Lee. Saturday, Catalans Warrington, and Sunday it's London Hull KR Salford Wigan. And in the Women's Super League, apart from that game at St Helens on Saturday, it's Warrington Wigan, and on the Sunday, Barrow Featherstone. That'll be a cracker, and that's obviously the curtain raiser for the men's game between the two clubs are playing the men and the women on the same day in the same location. How the hell has that happened in 2 of the 4 fixtures? And York versus York at Huddersfield. If the virus has gone, yeah, mate, might have to listen to Radio Leeds for that, Radio York for that one.
London's a fascinating game after what happened this week. London obviously coming off the buoyancy of their first win and being quite bullish in some of what they've said after it about we're coming up with a plan to stay in Super League. And obviously we know of some of the issues surrounding their grading that they're disputing, not least the fandom one. But they're coming off a bruised Hull KR. Be very interesting to see how Hull KR respond to that one. I just think Huddersfield Lee is quite interesting, again purely because Lee were just hitting form. They've had a week off, which won't do them any harm whatsoever, because they've got some injured players that they'll now have back. They've got that buoyancy of Lamb re-signing and staying on. So a lot of the players that are out of contract at the end of the year might now be thinking, well, if he's staying, I think that might be my preferred option. And it is a test for the rest of Huddersfield season. How do they respond to such a poor performance in front of their home fans? So yeah, 2 interesting games there. I think St Helens Leeds is interesting for the reason of let's see which coach is under the most pressure after that one. But yeah, it's and the women's game that's the curtain raiser is now in fact the dress rehearsal for Wembley. So a decent weekend to look forward to. Do
you know what game you're doing yet, James?
Yeah, I do. I've got Huddersfield Lee, which I think will be a good tie actually. But Castleford look set to get another 2 points, don't they, against Hull?
So I'm assuming you're going to be at St Helens, Phil, on Friday. Are you going to be there?
The intention at this stage is to pop along and see both of those games. Yes.
So you'll watch that anyway somehow. James is watching Huddersfield. I can watch Cass Hull then. That's fine. That's divvied up Friday. And then I'll forget and just watch Saints Leeds instead. So that's all good. I think we're done. There's nothing else. We don't need to keep these people listening for any longer, do we? We've got things to do. You've got biscuits to eat, Phil. I've got a hat to wear. So if I put it this way around, right, when I go into Wembley, it's not in club colours and there's no badge, so I'll get let in. James, you got anything you want to put on your head?
No, it's not a great look. Neither the M&S biscuits or the hat, to be honest.
That's terrible, isn't it? But it could have been worse.
I'm eating your biscuit now for them.
I look like I could be a photographer. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll be back next week to talk about all the things that we've just mentioned that might happen this week. And some of them might actually happen. We'll have to find out. Thank you very much for your support. We were high in the charts this week. So again, you must have done something with the algorithm because we don't know what we're doing. So join us next week for more of this stuff. Thank you very much. Bye, the magazine. it.